Going back to the conversation on white supremacist violence in the United Kingdom in August 2024, I want to spend a little bit of time delineating the various forms of violence and the range of violence that we classify as violent extremism. It is important that we critically interrogate the definitions of violent extremism. Now, hegemonic approaches or dominant approaches to defining violent extremism often obfuscate or erase questions of power and control. Bringing power and control to the center of the definition, the culture-centered approach asks us to engage in dialogue with voices of communities at the margins of the margins. So what we learn from the work of CARE with the culture-centered approach when engaging with voices of Muslims who have systematically experienced these forces of violence is the need to expand the definition of what we mean by violent extremism. In the voices of Muslims, particularly Muslims at the intersectional margins who often experience multiple forces of violence working together, it is the terrorizing effect of violence that needs to be put into context. So the idea that violent extremism actually produces terror in the targeted subject offers us a framework for looking at violent extremism from the perspective of those that experience the full force of violent extremism. Centering power and control, therefore, invites us to look at range of actions that produce terror. On one end of the scale, we have examples of extreme violence, such as the Christchurch terrorist attack and the massacre that is situated around it, that resulted in deaths of Muslims. And if we place that along a continuum, then we need to also look at examples of targeted processions in Muslim neighborhoods, or we need to look at the marking of Muslim neighborhoods and Muslim homes and the targeted violent attacks on Muslim homes. We need to look at attacks on Muslim shops in Muslim areas within communities by mobs, by groups of people. We need to look at physical attacks on Muslims, visibly appearing Muslims that appear to be Muslim because of habits of dressing or because of other forms of habits of appearance, such as wearing a beard. Now, connected to this, then, we also need to look at calls for boycotts of Muslim shops, for instance. We need to look at the calls for boycotting of Muslim applicants into neighborhoods for homes, or boycotts of Muslim employees through employment practices. So what I'm arguing here is that violence takes various forms, all the way from forms that directly express themselves into acts of killing to physical attacks that might not result in killing, but attacks such as the pulling of the hijab, or what we are seeing in United Kingdom right now in terms of acts of slapping and kicking, to acts of desecrating Muslim neighborhoods, attacking Muslim shops, attacking mosques, targeted processions around mosques meant to intimidate, to calls for boycotts of Muslims from employment, from opportunities to secure housing, to boycotts of Muslim businesses, and moving further down to the discursive architecture that constructs Muslims as the other, that dehumanizes Muslims, that reduces Muslims to less than human forms in order to legitimize the violence. Now, looking at this spectrum helps us see how we can move from violent discourses to practices of violence. So, when we consider ways in which we operationalize hate speech, then, or speech that is hateful on various platforms, it is important to then look at the interplays of power and control. It is important to look at the ways in which these architectures of power and control then call for forms of violence and then are correlated with these acts of violence. At the heart of it all, the culture-centered approach invites us to consider the voices of those communities at the margins that experience that violence. At the heart of this approach is the emphasis placed on building voice infrastructures for voices for communities at the margins of the margins, so that they can participate in shaping the policies, shaping the solutions around addressing this architecture of violent extremism.